Hey, this is Lainey Cameron. I am coming to you from Copenhagen this time, and I'm with my fabulous co-host, Paulette Stout.
Hello. I
And
know, right?
this is a fun one because we have two special guests joining us, Alison Hammer and Michelle Cox, and we will introduce them in a second and tell you all about them. But the reason we wanted some guests is this session is all about how marketing is different depending on your publishing model. And even what you get from your publisher is different depending on your publishing model or even within publishing models. And so we wanted to really bring this out because I see a lot of misunderstanding on this. One of the things I think I shared in an early episode that drives me crazy is when someone takes a list of all these things you must do to market your book, and they just kind of work through the list and they try and do all 50 things. And it turns out the list was written for a completely different publishing path. And it makes no sense for that person who's an indie published author to go follow a list that was designed for a 18-month timeline from a large publisher, for example. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to just try and help educate a little about what is different, what's the same, how does it work? And so that's our goal for this episode.
Yes. And so I can't wait to dive in. And just for like personal updates, let's dive in because we have so much to cover today. So just go a little quickly in the upfront. So I'm kind of neck deep in revisions for my next novel, which comes out in February. And I just want to talk about one thing really quick because I wasn't ready. Like life is just got in the way a little bit. So I decided to, delay some of the editor and the narrator and all that stuff and just push it back and give myself some grace to breathe. I have buffer room, but it's just like sometimes you have these deadlines and things you push yourself to do because you think you have to. And it's like, but do I? It's like that Rebecca Syme question the premise. So I moved it back, feeling okay about it. So I think I will really enjoy that extra month to work on the manuscript. And my little KU experiment is going pretty well right now. I'm finding readers, and now I'm have to just slap my hand when I want to check the dashboard to see what page readers are on. It's just like a little bit insane how much data you get in indie, and that's different from what we'll talk about with our guests in terms of what you get and what's different by publishing path. But those are my big things for you. How about you, Lainey?
Okay, so for me, can you hear me okay?
I can.
For me, I took a vacation. I'm very excited. I took like a whole week off and like off of everything, off social media, off life, off writing, off the law. I went on a cruise, a Virgin cruise out of Barcelona, and it was absolutely fabulous. Just loved it. So I just want to encourage people, if you feel like you need to step away from it all, the world doesn't stop turning. You can do it. Like, I feel like we're tied to our social media sometimes and we feel like we can't leave. And like, I did this last year. I stepped away for a month from social media, and several people told me afterwards that they actually like did it as a result of seeing that I got away with it and did it, and somehow nothing fell apart. It was fine.
Right. The world didn't collapse.
Exactly. So with that, I'm back at it. One of the things I'm trying to work out right now is when I'm going to do my next round of my class, my marketing program for authors called 12 Weeks to Book Launch Success, where I help them create an entire launch plan for their book. If I were to run it again this year, I would need to be opening it for registration in September to start in October if we wanted to finish it this year, because I definitely don't want to run it through Christmas week. So I just started mapping that out. If you're interested, get on the wait list, because last time it sold out off of the wait list before I even shared it anywhere else. So just a heads up that I'm kind of looking towards maybe opening it up in September. So I think those are my two big things. Oh, and I will be at the WFWA Women's Fiction Writers Retreat in September. And I'm really looking forward that I'm going to be teaching a book marketing boot camp for 3 hours on the Saturday afternoon. That is going to be an absolute blast. So I'm super excited about that.
Hook that up, people. If you are going to WFWA and if you haven't registered yet, I think they still have some spots open because I got an email like yesterday or something. So look into that. Women's Fiction Writers Association, Albuquerque Retreat. Lainey will be there in person, and she is fab. So she is worth going just for her. So that's all.
And I believe there's still a few, very, very few spots left. It's almost sold out, but not quite. So you're not too late yet.
Almost, but get it quick.
So with that, I think we should jump into introducing our two guests. And I think you're going to go first, Paulette. So let me bring them both on camera. There we go.
Awesome. So with us today, we have Michelle Cox. Michelle has always been obsessed with stories of the past and has spent a lifetime collecting them. She's an award-winning author of historical fiction, including the Henrietta and Inspector Howard series, The Fallen Women's Daughter, and the Merriweather Novels. Cox also pens the wildly popular Novel Notes of Local Lore, a weekly blog chronicling the lives of Chicago's forgotten residents, and she lives in the suburbs of Chicago. The first book in her new series, The Merriweather Novels, launches on September 2024. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me. This is fun.
And next we have Alison Hammer. I think you're taking that, Lainey.
Yep, I'll introduce Alison. So Alison and I have known each other for quite a while. And one of the things I love is that Alison has been very open about sharing her journey and what she's been through in her publishing journey, which has been, totally straight, smooth sailing like everybody, right? You can see if you're on the audio version, everybody's like shaking their heads here right now. And so Alison is half of the writing duo called Ali Brady with my other good friend, Bradeigh Godfrey. And their debut novel, The Beach Trap, made several best of summer lists, including the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Parade Magazine, Katie Couric Media. And their new book that just came out until next summer is, as of just a few weeks ago, a USA Today bestseller. Congratulations. And Alison lives in Chicago. She works in Annapolis. Am I saying it correctly? As an advertising creative director, we were just chit-chatting about the challenge of managing day jobs with writing lives before this, because Paulette has to do the same. And she's the founder and co-president of Artists Against Anti-Semitism, and also the author of You, Me, and Us and Little Pieces of Me. And she has no pets, plants, or kids, but she does have 3 nephews, 2 human and 1 canine. Okay.
We have a chat here. So if you are watching live either on Facebook or YouTube, please do chat us. We will respond in real time, as Beth Miller Cox has been doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the first question we're going to kick off with is we wanted to have each of our speakers, us included, talk about what publishing path did you choose? And for some of us, it's been more than one, because author careers are not a straight line where you do one thing and it always looks exactly like you started, right? So I love that we have 2 guests who have that experience of like switching, like learning and switching over time. And so what we're going to talk about first is have each of us talk about what is the publishing path you chose, and a little bit of how it's changed over time, if it has changed for you. So maybe I'll have Michelle lead off with this one. Why don't you start us off?
Okay, great. Yeah, so I wrote a novel back in 2012-ish, and it was my first novel, and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know anything about publishing, and I submitted it to like 200 agents, and I got nowhere. So I'm like, obviously there's either something wrong with the product, which there was, or I'm, going about it wrong. So I decided to go to a conference in New York, the Writer's Digest conference, and I just learned a ton. And one of the things that became kind of apparent to me was that it just seemed like there was a lot of, I won't say hate, but it seemed like there were a lot of people very sour about traditional publishing, which was really discouraging to me because I was, brand new, like the newest newbie that ever was. And I got there like so excited, and everybody was very down on traditional publishing. And that's even back in 2013. And so I sort of wandered into this workshop, and it was about hybrid publishing. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. This sounds like the perfect solution, because there's no way I was going to self-publish at that point. It wasn't even on the radar. So I did some investigation, and I eventually started looking into She Writes Press, and I submitted the novel, and they said, no, we're not going to take this. It's way too long. It's blah, 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 all these things. So I said, you know what, I wrote a new novel. And I was so excited about hybrid publishing that I didn't even submit it to any agents. I just went directly to She Writes Press, and they said, yeah, we'll take this one. And that was the start of the Henrietta and Inspector Howard series, A Girl Like You. And so I just kind of went with them. And it was a great experience at the beginning. So, it was fine. It's just that I think I kind of stayed there too long. I stayed with them for 7 books, which is great. I learned a lot, but there's just no way you can make that money back, much less make a profit. So by that point, I was kind of learning a lot about self-publishing and getting more and more confident. I was listening to podcasts. And finally this year with The Fallen Woman's Daughter, I just took that plunge. And so now I'm an indie author and I'm just like never going to look back. It's awesome. I love it. So that's my journey. Yeah.
Yeah. How was that for you, Allison?
So my journey, my first book that I wrote took me 15 years to finish writing. And I didn't even really start. I just wanted to write it. And when I finished it, I was like, well, I guess I should maybe see if I could get someone to read it. So I didn't start writing to set out to be published. That was just kind of like, I just wanted to write.
Yeah.
And that first book, like a lot of us, like Michelle, I have a drawer book too. But I reached out to a friend who had been published and I was like, what do I do now? And she told me to join Women's Fiction Writers Association, which is where I met all of you, which is great. I started looking into getting an agent because that was the traditional path and it was just what I felt like went next. So I did that. I went to a lot of conferences and you could spend like $28 to have 10-minute pitch sessions with agents. So I did things like that. And when I had been querying my first book for about a year, I had a couple of agents who gave me revise and resubmits. I had quite a few people asking for fulls, but no bites. And I had started working on a second book, and which a lot of people end up having to do. A lot of people, their second book ends up being their first published book. And I went to a writing conference and I met with an editor and I at that conference and I handed them 2 different pitch letters, one for the first book I wrote and one for the second. And they said that second one was more marketable. So I put the first book in that drawer fully and went forward with my second manuscript. And that one got an agent. I got an agent actually at that conference is where I met my agent, Joanna McKenzie with the Nelson Agency. That was in 2018. Sold my book in an auction to William Morrow, which was incredible, part of HarperCollins. My debut, You and Me and Us, came out April 7th, 2020, 3 weeks into the pandemic, which just was soul crushing. One of my author dreams is to be in airport bookstores. And, that's something that you can really only happen if you do the traditional publishing model. But it was supposed to be in all Hudson Airport bookstores. And then they canceled the order because nobody was flying, which was just heartbreaking. So I had 2 books with William Morrow, HarperCollins. And then during the pandemic, my best friend Brady and I had an idea to write together. And we sold that on a proposal, which was not a usual situation, to Berkeley, which is part of Penguin Random House. And The Beach Trap, as you said in the bio, is our debut. Our third book, Until Next Summer, came out last month on July 9th. And our next book, we're getting ready to do a cover reveal. So it's crazy how fast it happens. But so that will be my 6th book published, which does not seem real.
And Paulette, I think of you as the indie queen. You went indie and didn't look back, right?
Yes. Well, I had a book in a drawer too. I wrote a murder mystery, and I threw with somebody, got to Donald Moz and submitted it to him, and it was in no kind of way to be seen by human eyes. So like when I saw him and I had him sign my book at the BFF Bradeigh, I was like, I didn't mention that I had queried him like 1,000 years ago with a horrible book. So I queried that one. I also queried my debut, which has a, it's on women's intimacy, and I'm sure no one wants to touch it with a 10-foot pole. So I did end up going indie, and it's been really great for me. Cover snafu aside. Really, I'm a very independent person. I have a marketing background. I'm a kind of a control freak, and I'm super impatient. Growing up in Manhattan was like, so it kind of suits me. But now that's like I've gone back to work and whatever, and I kept going to conferences and getting sat with agents like all the time, like at WFWA, and I just keep sitting with agents, and it felt like the world was like starting to like talk to me. So I did have a conversation with an agent, and the next book I'm going to write, I am going to submit just to her. She doesn't want it. I'll do it myself. So I kind of like I don't need it, but I'm curious, so we'll see what goes with that next one. But my fourth self-published will come out in February. So yeah, it's been an interesting ride, lots to learn, but the more you learn, the easier it gets, which is a great thing about the indie path. And I'm sure any path of anything you learn in life for sure. And Lainey, what's your story?
So I queried my first one, which actually was my first one, but it got revised, rewritten so many times and made so much better by people like Alison, who you can do better, fix this. But I think I rewrote that book like 10 times, but it was my first one. And that one I queried, and I learned a lot about when your book doesn't fit in the box, right? When your book doesn't directly fit into a book like this has sold to a big publisher before. I ended up in a place after revising it a lot where it was like, I love your book, but I don't know how to sell it. I've never seen publishers buy a similar book. And so it's a very interesting learning experience for me to realize that, past success is what agents and publishers look at when they're choosing whether to publish, especially big ones, when they're choosing whether to publish a book. If you've got something that doesn't fit, doesn't look like anything in the past, it's going to be tricky. And so I went the small publisher path, a digital first small publisher for my first book. And what that means is that they paid all the costs of publishing, but they didn't do a lot for me on the marketing side. And that's very common with smaller publishers, especially digital first smaller publishers. So we're actually going to bridge into talking a little bit about what are the advantages marketing wise that you've seen from the publishing path you chose. And let's keep this brief because we're actually going to dig in and talk specifically about pre-launch, launch, after launch. So just at the high level, and let's kind of hand it to Alison first. At the high level, what do you think are the big advantages of having been with a traditional publisher and with a bigger traditional publisher?
I think to your point, I think, and I will keep this brief, but I think the pros of traditional publishing are the cons of self-publishing, and the pros of self-publishing are the cons of traditional. So I think that they really do. It's about what you want. And as part of being with a traditional publishing company, I do have a publicity and a marketing team that are working for my book. They're working on several other books, but they do have a budget, and they are working to help market my book. So it's not something that I have to do completely on my own.
Yeah. And I like what you said about the pros and cons, because, that means that they have a point of view on what they're going to do, and you don't always get to control it, versus in the indie side, it's all over to you to do it all, but you do have complete control.
100%. And it's just about what you want. And I do think that there are certain outlets and places that are for traditional only. So there are, there are not as many, there are more gatekeepers for things like that. But I feel like more and more, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, traditional published authors have to do just as much marketing on their own, because you can't rely just on the publishing company anymore. These days, it feels like authors are given a lot more responsibility for that. So I do think that it's not like I can hand it over and not worry about it. So, but I do have a team that's supporting me, which is nice.
That's nice. And Michelle, what about you? What are the advantages of the different paths you've chosen?
Well, one of the advantages of going with a hybrid, or specifically She Writes Press, is that you are highly, highly, highly encouraged. You're not forced, but you're highly encouraged to hire a PR agent. And so I did that for several years, and the advantage there is probably similar to what Alison was talking about, is that you do have someone behind you. I'm not sure, it doesn't really translate necessarily into sales. It might affect visibility and stuff like that. I guess the advantage there for me was just that I learned a lot. So I learned a lot about what traditional marketing looks like, or PR. And so that taught me a lot going forward. And the advantage, of course, of self-publishing is that because I can have access to my KDP dashboard, I can hourly see, what is going on. And I can see if I'm running an ad, I can tell if that ad is working, and I can tweak it. And so that to me, that is the number one advantage.
And if I can jump in, just to my point about the pros of one being the cons of the other, I have zero visibility. I can look at, some of the stats on Amazon and things like that, but those aren't accurate. And so there's really no way for me, unless I'm running something, there's no way for me to tell what's working or any of that data, because the publishing company, has control of that, and it's not something that they share.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that can be completely frustrating, but it's so interesting. Okay, so now we're going to kind of begin our discussion that's more a little bit about stages of the publishing process. So we're talking about the pre-launch stuff. So I'll start with you, Ali. So when you think about the pre-launch period, what are the major things the publisher does for you versus what you have to do for yourself? And anything you think that's worked well or surprises, anything in that? And I have like a little corollary I want to throw in there in terms of, I've heard some people encourage you to spend your advance on marketing, and there's some expectation there. So I'd love you to just comment if there's any kind of like expectations for what the authors were expected to do from a trad perspective.
I don't think that you're expected to hire anybody. I think that a lot of people do. We hired outside publicity for my 2 books, and then our first 2 books. We didn't this time, but that was just a decision about some finances and just different things like that. But marketing is not something that I think people are expected to pay for outside of it. But I do think that there is an expectation to the word platform didn't exist 10 years ago. And now that authors have platforms, like, it feels like we're expected to do what we can to help support in marketing. And as far as, the pre-launch thing, again, when you're doing your own book or working with a small press, the number of books they have is smaller. When you're with a company, like we're with Penguin Random House in Berkeley, they have so many books coming out, and they are on a schedule. And so, like, our next book, Battle of the Bookstores, comes out next summer, but we're going to be ready for our cover reveal in September. Last time our cover wasn't ready until like January or February. And so you're really at the mercy of their schedule and when they fit you in. So there really is not control. You have to wait for your book and to show up in their allotted time to work on it. You can do stuff on your own, but again, it's you have this great benefit, but it's very much like they're not working for. Here's the thing. Okay, this explains it maybe a little bit. They're not working for you. They are working for your book. And like when you hire somebody, you can say, will you do this? Will you do that? Will you do that? But they are a huge company that all they do is market and sell and publish books. And so they do what they think is right and what they believe will work. But you just don't have that much visibility or say or control in it. And it does feel in this world like you have pressure on you to do more. So publishing companies, the other thing, sorry, this is another thing that just popped up, is that they look at results as far as what drives sales. But as you know, with marketing, it's not just about sales. You want to build your brand. You want to have like name recognition and things like that. So cover reveals don't really drive sales. They don't really think that people pre-order until a lot closer to when the book is. So if you want to do a big splash for a pre-order, unless you're one of like the top people and you can get Entertainment Weekly or something like that to cover your book, you're on your own for your cover reveal, which is fine. But it's more about generating excitement than sales. And publishing companies are interested in the things that will move sales. And when we're talking sales, they're talking about thousands of copies or tens of thousands of copies, not tens of copies. So anything that feels like it's a little bit lower on not moving sales is really going to be up to the author individually.
And I had a question for you. Do they, in the big publisher scenario, do they put books into the hands of influencers? I know there's been a whole conversation about like electronic ARCs versus paper ARCs, and do big publishers even give you paper ARCs anymore? Like, how much do they do for you in terms of getting the book into the hands of potential early reviewers?
I will say that every publishing company and every imprint within every publishing company is different. When I was with William Morrow, I got a box of like 40 ARCs. With Berkeley, they're really moving away from the print ARCs, and we were able to get like 10. So we ended up printing our own because I think it's really important. I know people like them and they want to see them, and we wanted to see it photographed on Instagram. So they gave us a little bit, but we supplemented it. And what was the other part of your question? Sorry.
No, it's kind of the same question. Do they get books out to influencers or reviewers for you, or how much of it do you have to do?
So they don't. A lot of that's their oh my gosh, what's the word? Proprietary information.
Yeah.
So like that you get who's going to have it, who's going to show it, but they don't tell you everybody that they necessarily like pitched you to. And I believe how Berkeley does it is that their influencers get a list of the books that are coming out, and they get to pick like 2 or 3. So, you hope that they will pick your book, but it's not like, again, they're promoting all of these books. For me, I'm worried about my book. So anything above and beyond, like we'll do on our own. And I think one of the best things about having a platform and being active on social media is building a relationship. Like I have people turn from readers to friends to actual friends all the time. And I think that those connections are really important, and can help people be word of mouth and advocates and sharing your stuff. So a lot of that stuff has to come a little bit more naturally. And I think that it definitely helps having the support of a publishing company, but you can't rest on that entirely.
Great. And what about you, Michelle? What's your experience been in the pre-launch period?
Similar, I mean, I think that the tendency with authors is that if they have a PR person or, team behind them, the tendency is to think that, I'm done, just let them handle it. And that's like, obviously, like Alison was saying, it's a huge mistake, because you really have to be your own advocate, and you have to sort of be building your brand, building your audience, building your newsletter subscriber list, and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that like with a hybrid press or She Writes Press in particular, they're definitely modeled on a traditional model. So your PR company is trying to get you like trade reviews and get you out to influencers like you were talking about, and get you in different magazines and stuff like that. But I think that a lot of that doesn't necessarily work anymore. Kind of like you were saying, I don't think it really translates into sales, and I don't actually know how much it really translates into even visibility. So I am a big proponent of the Instagram book tours. I think that those are something that so if I'm doing a pre-launch, that's one of the things that I definitely do. And I think a couple of books ago, I did 4 bookstagram tours, and that was a little bit too many. So I just have 2 favorites now that I use. And I think that those are super effective, because those people have thousands and thousands of followers. But again, because I'm self-publishing, I have to print all of those books, and that's, really expensive. But I think it's a worthy expense. And then I rely a lot on like a newsletter subscriber list. I have a pretty large subscriber list, and that that's something that you have to build over time, and that's very effective, I think, and for a pre-launch. And also, I think doing like a BookBub deal of a previous book with links in the back can be really effective to try to push people into pre-ordering or ordering the next book. So those are my 3 big pre-launch tactics.
Yeah. Yep. Go ahead, Lainey.
So one thing I wanted to comment on there, because we got into a little bit of how, hybrid acts more like big publisher, and big publishers are on this timeline, right, where they're kind of working 12 plus months out, right? And they've got publicists and they're working on these long lead times. When you're with a small publisher like I was, the lead times look entirely different. So like my time between signing my contract with my publisher and my book coming into the world, I think was about 6 months or less, very often less. And so I didn't even get my final cover, final title, arcs, electronic arcs, until like 45 days before the book was coming out into the world, before the release date. So Why does that matter? Because some of these things you might do, let's say hiring a publicist and having a publicist reach out to long lead time publications, just don't make any sense if you're on a much shorter timeline and you're only going to get a final cover 45 days before the release date. Because, for example, some of these best of lists, if you want to have a publicist go after some of these best of spring, they're being decided 6 to 12 months before the book comes out, right? And so if you only have 45 days, it doesn't matter how much you want to be on the best of spring list, you missed it. It was decided back 4 months before you had your cover. And so
Yeah.
I just think that's something that people need to understand, is that the timelines do affect what's accessible and possible for you. It's not bad or good. None of this is bad or good. It's just a case of understanding that different paths have different advantages and disadvantages. And so if you're with a very small publisher, very often the timelines are much shorter. So the big advantage is your book gets out into the world faster. But the disadvantage is some of those things that have long lead times just won't make sense to do. And so, like, my publisher is a small publisher, and a lot of the small publishers do this. They made NetGalley available to me, but I had to pay some towards it. But then they didn't do much else in terms of reaching out to reviewers. They didn't have an in-house publicist. So when it came to reaching out to influencers and reviewers, it really all came down to me to do that. It wasn't like the publicist was going to do any of that for me.
And that's
Right,
so
Alison,
interesting. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's so interesting with the timeline. And again, there's pros and cons, because for us, like, people are going to start seeing this cover in September, but they can't buy it until like May or June of next year. And so,
Right.
you know, like, even thinking about, not to get political, but thinking about this election, like, with everything that's happened, she has a very, very short window, but there's excitement. And so if you have your book coming out and it's like, oh my God, 45 days, people don't have to wait that long. And so
I agree.
you have less time to build up, but you have more excitement. And the other thing that I was going to say is that something that, my day job's in advertising. So this is something I think about a lot. And Bookstagram is incredible. Like, I've built some incredible friendships, and just the reading community is amazing. But if you think about it, we're all talking to ourselves. Like, these people post a book every day, and most people don't read that much. And so
Exactly.
one thing that I've tried to think about and do is that, are there non-book people who are aligned with the content I'm writing about that can share it? Because they may share 1 or 2 or 3 books a year. And so if their audience sees my book, then it's a little bit more special than somebody who's just doing books. And it's so hard to see what works. Suzanne Park, who's another author and a friend of a lot of ours, she is pretty good at watching what comes out and seeing the impact. And the things that she's noticed that have the biggest impact are things in print, unfortunately, and things, again, that are not all book focused, but it's a book feature and something else. But so much of that, it's really hard to tell unless you have the data, like some of you have, to see that cause and effect impact of sales.
Right.
Yeah, and it's so interesting you're saying that, because I think with my indie model, I was kind of in between. Like, I publish around once every 12 to 14 months, so it's a little bit more of a trad model than some, like, an indie author who rapid releases. So I try to have my book done. In my first 2 books, I did use a publicist. So I had like a 5-month campaign, and then I had like a 3-month campaign. And even on my last book, where I did it myself, my book came out in February. I contacted book influencers in August, because I just started watching their content and looking at what they were doing and seeing if it was an alignment. And, I made my own list of people to contact. I made my own little book tour just by engaging with them and sending them emails. And, you go online. If they have an email, they want to be contacted. If they don't have an email, they kind of don't. So, you can kind of self-select a little bit. Like, that person, if they're only going to be covering, big trad books, then they may not be interested in, an indie book. So you just have to kind of see who's going to be receptive to your thing. And the timelines on the indie side, like, you can control it, and it can be whatever you want. And, sometimes people just let it slide right out into the night and don't do anything. And then they go on vacation, and that's totally fine. It's like whatever works for you, because you don't have someone there, like, what are the sales, where's your book scan or whatever it's called, it's like, where's your data? You don't, it's you don't care if you want to go on vacation, So great. That's great content. I think Lainey now can take us away for our first sponsor.
Our very first sponsor segment, because we have a sponsor for the podcast. And I am so excited about this, because it's someone that I know and have worked with personally. And it's funny that we were just talking about the challenges on PR and publicity and knowing what actually works and what is worth your time and what is not worth your time. And it can be really complicated, and what's the lead time with different publications, etc. So I'm very pleased to announce that our sponsor is Lillian Sue, who is a PR coach and publicist. And she's not your average publicist. So she's not someone who you have to pay $10,000 to a package to go talk to, which is very often the case, that publicists can be very expensive and they expect a monthly retainer and all kinds of things. So one of the things that Lillian just did, which is really exciting, is she brought out a book to help authors with publicity. It's called The Powerful Publicity Prescription. And it's really cool because it actually breaks down, I've just been reading it, it breaks down some of the PR myths, like the myth that all publicity is good, the myth that spending a lot of money means success, that certain types of media coverage are automatically good for you. And so I love that actually at the beginning of the book, she actually tackles some of these myths and says, yeah, let's not assume that's all true and let's talk about what's reality. And then she actually goes into like the history of PR, how to overcome fear when you're pitching, how to develop a pitch, how to develop your list as an author if you're going to pitch certain publications, how to create a PR kit. So I love how practical this book is as well. So it's called The Powerful Publicity Prescription. And I love that Lillian Sue trusted us enough to be our first sponsor on the podcast here. And she also does one-on-one coaching. And one of the things I like, she's actually very savvy. She has helped me with my program with 12 Weeks to Book Launch Success. I've actually had her teach the PR week. That's how much I trust her advice. So she's been teaching parts of my class for me. And one of the things I really love is that she works with authors one-on-one, and she works really flexibly where she'll actually coach you if you want to do your own PR, or she'll pick up parts of the program and do it for you. But like I said, it's not like the one and only way to work with me is a massive package. And I like that because I feel like very often authors blow money that doesn't end up working out for them in the PR space. And some of us have had that experience that are here. It's like you get very excited and you think it's going to be the big difference maker, and it turns out not to always be the case. So I think Lillian's pretty savvy at helping authors work through some of these issues around like, well, what is my target market and what will work and what's really going to make any difference and what's not worth my time. So super excited. You can find all of the links to all of her stuff on our episode page, and check out the book, The Powerful Publicity Prescription. I have read it and I can tell you that it's actually really useful. I learned some things. So there you go.
It is. Yeah. And PR is one of those things that's, very important in the PR, in the pre-launch phase. If you're going to do that, we're going to move now into the launch phase. So I'll throw this to Michelle. So what are the things in your experience that you've had, either starting with the hybrid and then also with as an indie author, what happens from like, what does the publisher do for you in the launch period? And anything that you think that worked really well, and anything that was like, yeah, maybe skip that.
Yeah, the publisher itself doesn't do a lot. Maybe post on social media that, yay, the book is out and stuff like that. The PR company I worked with arranged a launch for me, and which with my first book was really helpful because I didn't really know what I was doing. And they also arranged like a little mini tour for me to go to different cities. And that was really, really fun and exciting. But as time has gone on, so then when I started, actually even the end of the series, when I was doing my own PR, and now, of course, in the indie space, I usually do a big launch party at a local bookstore that's been very supportive of me. And that's great. But the last book was the first book that I actually didn't do a launch because I just feel like I was spending a lot of money for like food and drinks and balloons and prizes and all this kind of stuff. And most of the people that showed up were probably going to buy the book anyway. So it was kind of like a nice party for me and the bookstore and, those people that showed up. But in terms of, getting the book out there, farther, I feel like that's sort of an online job. And again, I hate to bring it always back to ads, but I really think that ads are, kind of the key. You can reach Facebook's, billion users, and that's something that's super, super powerful. So that is kind of what I do now is really lean into the online presence.
Cool. And Alison, what are your thoughts there?
You know, the first thing I want to say is that like the phrase like what works. I think that it depends on what like I don't know. Does anything work? But I think that like you also have to establish what your goals are. Because if you're
Mhm.
talking about works as in sales, like that's one way of working. But again, like most of us don't want to have just one book and be done. We want to build a readership. We want to build a community. We want to build relationships and have people like look forward to or read our past books. And so, you know, that's something that we think a lot about. As far as what the publishing company does, they do have marketing. So they, you know, and I forgot to mention this before, they do a couple Goodreads giveaways before, and that I think is one of the really great things what for anybody to do, because when somebody enters the contest, that it automatically excuse me, has them as a want to read, and they will get an alert when your book comes out. So I think that I believe that's how it works. So I think that that's something that's really beneficial to do. So they do that, but they'll do advertising on Facebook, they'll do advertising on Amazon, a little bit. You know, we don't have insight to the details of that. We've had some help putting together a book tour. When we had an outside publicist, that publicist helped us with that. This year they helped us a little bit. But again, you know, their goals you have to think about it differently, because their goals as a big publishing company are to sell books and to sell like thousands of copies of books. For us, our goals are of course also to sell thousands of copies, but you know, just as importantly, to build a brand and to build relationships. And so for the publishing company, a tour is not necessarily like very worth the time and the money. But for us, it's been priceless because we have relationships with booksellers who are going to hand sell our books. We've met readers who are going to be our friends and our advocates. And so I think that just thinking about the word works is interesting, because for us, we're really thinking about it for the long game, individual book sales and building that brand.
Yeah, I think that's so critical. And I'm curious, you know, you're talking about building the brand and having people come with you along the way. I'm curious from a trad perspective, obviously you've been with a publisher where you have multiple titles. So do they ever go back and kind of give a little love to a backlist title in the same series to kind of, you know, ramp up when the new book is coming out?
So we don't have series. Our Ali Brady books are all connected.
Okay.
They're in the same world, and there's Easter eggs of characters from past books that show up. But they do, the last 2 times they have done a book bub for our previous book, leading up to it to try to get new readers. And, you know, if somebody reads the last book and is like, oh, I really like it, and hey, there's a brand new one coming out, it works out great. So they are strategic and things like that. And they've got all of this. They don't share the individual data, but they have the data on what's worth it and where, you know, they know that behaviors that people don't pre-order until it's soon. And so like you might have some people pre-ordering, you know, a book a year out or 6 months out, but most pre-orders come in later. And so they model their decisions based on that. And one of the biggest cons, I think, of traditional publishing is you have very little control. And so you're here being like, I want to do everything I can to help my book be a success. And it's like you kind of have to trust that the publishing company is going to be helping you, and then also do what you're comfortable with your time and your money and the resources that you have.
Yep. Lainey, go ahead.
I was just going to add there that I think pre-order campaigns are one of the areas where I see people get the most confused about different models. So, you know, pre-order campaigns came from this traditional world where they were designed to create excitement with bookstores, right? If bookstores see that lots of people are pre-ordering, they get excited, they order more copies, they're more likely to push the book, right? But then I see like indie authors or small publisher authors going, I must do a pre-order campaign. And they take the money that they could have spent after their book was out and they spend it in the pre-order period. Well, that's actually wasting money, because if you do the same thing when the book is out and someone can buy the book, 100% of the people who might have bought it will buy it. If you do a pre-order campaign, some number of people will go, oh, it's on pre-order, I'll just wait. I don't know if it's 1%, 10%, or 50%, but some percentage are not going to buy it then and there. And so when you put your money as an indie author in the book being available, you're generating demand, but some of it's getting wasted. Also, you're spreading out your Amazon ranking over time instead of it all hitting when your book comes out. And so I see this all the time, that indie authors do something that makes perfect sense for traditional authors, but maybe doesn't make sense for them as an indie author. And it's just a good example of where it kind of is different, right, across the two.
It's hugely
Yeah.
different. And that's such a good point because, the reasons for pre-orders are to let your publishing company know that people are excited about it in hopes that they will spend more money to support and promote it because they're like, oh, wow, people really want this book, to convince booksellers to get it in. And then also because those first sales, I hear you on the Amazon ranking, but if you pre-order, those sales all go to your first day or first week sales. And the reason that you want high first week sales is that is your best chance of getting on one of the lists, the USA Today list or the New York Times list. And so
Right.
that is the reason. But it would take a lot for an indie book to get on one of those lists, as at the state of where they're indie published. So that's a great reason to think about why people are doing those things, because it really doesn't make sense for indie authors to do pre-order campaigns.
Yeah, the other
Yeah.
reason it doesn't make sense is it doesn't actually calculate the same way for indie authors. Indie author sales get tallied the day they are sold. They do not aggregate. Like Apple will aggregate, Barnes & Noble will aggregate. Amazon does not
Amazon
aggregate pre-launch copies into day one, week one book sales tallies. So that's it's a completely different calculation. So it's
I didn't
another
know
reason
that.
it doesn't work. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, I put my books out because I write in a series. So I just kind of breadcrumb it in the back matter. And if someone wants to buy it, go ahead, knock yourself out. You finish the book and you want to know, go buy it. But otherwise, it's like I don't sell a ton pre-sale. So it just is making the point we're all making here, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I do want to just go back for a second to what you were saying, Alison, about building relationships with, readers and bookstores. That is actually super important. There is the bookseller in Chicago. It's great for indie authors. And one of the things that I do to try is to not just go in to these bookstores and be like, oh, hi, remember me? Do you have stock my book? Blah, blah, blah. But to show up to other authors' events, because not only are you, supporting that author, but I think that that's helping to build the relationship with the bookstores too.
And I do want to say that's the bookseller, CELLAR.
Yeah.
It's a great indie bookstore in Chicago.
Yeah, they're awesome.
Awesome. And I have one other comment on the launch party thing. I agree that I don't necessarily, think that a launch party sells books as such. What I advise the people who take my class, 12 Weeks to Book Launch Success, is actually do a party for you. Do a party, especially if you're a debut, right? So to your point, Michelle, if it's book 7, maybe you don't need to do this anymore. But if you're a debut, do something special to mark the moment because you just had this massive achievement and you should celebrate that achievement.
Yes.
Whether it's going out with your friends or it's buying wine or it doesn't necessarily even have to be about selling books, but mark that moment because 99% of people who say they're going to write a book never finish it. 99% of people who write a book never publish it. So you are in that 0.1%.
Yeah, exactly. And for book 4 of my series, I decided to deviate from the launch party, and I did a party at the Green Mill, which is like a jazz club that dates back to the 40s in Chicago. And it features into some of my books because I write historical mystery. And I just invited all of my readers to come to the Green Mill at that night. It was a big band night and it was just tons and tons of fun. So yes, do something.
Well, one more point about that. So our first book tour was for The Beach Trap. And because my first 2 books came out during the pandemic, I hadn't been able to do that. So I wanted to do it and I wanted to go big. And I spent too much money. I had, I bought food at places. I had drinks because I wanted to do a party for myself. Now, something that we look for when we're doing it is to your point, you don't want to get the people who are already going to read it. So one of the things that we've been doing is looking for bookstores that have a reputation of having a community and having events and having people come to their events, because it's not worth it if you're always seeing the same people. You want to go to a place and have a conversation partner that might bring other readers that will attract, and be interested in your book, and bookstores that have a good network and good marketing to help bring people also, because everything you're doing, you're trying to find new readers.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. I've not done one launch party for myself, but what I have done is bought book cakes. So you can buy a good cake for yourself, even if you don't have a party. I had like a book group, and I did a book group. Like my book group did my book, and then I got the book cake that time. But I highly recommend finding a local bakery that makes book cakes and having a book cake. Because there's something about seeing
It's
your
so
book
fun.
and having like a
Yeah.
celebration around your cover. And anyway, I'm all about the book cake. So just want to get that in. I know we got to go to the
All right,
next
well,
question, but
now I have a new goal because I did not have a book cake for my first book, which was also during the pandemic. And so now I'm like, okay, book 2 gets a book cake. I'm going to make it happen.
Yes.
So the next section, we wanted to talk about post-launch. So once your book is out, what do you have control of? What are you able to do? And I think it's very interesting, Alison, you know, you were saying advertising isn't something that you control. Obviously, that's something the publisher does. So I think it's really interesting in your case, like what do you have control of, or what can you do, or what does your publisher do for you after the book is out, as opposed to during the launch?
So good question. And I think we're still trying to figure that out. And this time we started doing some ads ourselves. Brady has tried to understand and has done Facebook ads and Amazon ads for us, and TBD on the value or worth of that. But it's something that we are trying. But after, again, there's a schedule. And so it's, you get, I feel like, a lot of high intensity for the first 2 weeks, and then it starts to slowly go down. For us, our books have all been like summer books, and we've had one come out in May, one come out in June, and one come out in July. There's a difference, because do you have the runway of the whole summer, or do you have, a shorter time toward the end? There are people who read summer books, and I'm doing air quotes, but year round, or when they go on vacation or things like that. But within the traditional publishing model, they're ready to move on. When your book comes out after a couple weeks, they're moving on to the next book for their next season, and then also thinking ahead to the next year. So it really is it's a machine that you fit into. But we do try to keep the conversation going. We try to connect with book clubs. We try to get the individual advocates and people to read it, try to get readers engaged. And again, we're going to be late in just about a month. We'll be revealing our cover of our next book to get maybe even a new audience with that. So just, I makes me think, just keep swimming, just try your best.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've heard it said that big publishers make a decision about how successful they think a book is, even like as it's coming out, right? Like it's very different to an indie book, right? Like in terms of when they feel like they know how well the book's done.
I think that yes and no. For the most part, yes. And if you read the book Yellowface, which was great and also very depressing, there is definitely an amount of, a publisher can choose to make a book successful by putting more marketing, by putting more efforts and energy into that. But you also see cases where they put a ton of money into it and readers just don't like it. Also, the other thing I think about all the time is that we're talking about success in book sales. That doesn't, just because you buy a book doesn't mean somebody's going to like it, or they're going to read it, or they're going to buy your next one. And so that's why I think all these different things and metrics matter. But it's really hard to know. That's why you have to do your best and do the things that you enjoy or that you can do, because what you do, and again, with a traditional publisher, they're looking at book sales in thousands. Nothing I do can do that. So you want to do everything you can, but also I feel like you should relax a little bit with not put so much pressure on yourself, because if you don't enjoy it and it's not that, then it's okay to not do it. Your involvement and your running ads is not going to make or break the success of your book.
Right. And Michelle, what about for you? You've been in the hybrid model, you're indie. Like when it comes to the book is out, it sounds like advertising is where you're betting kind of that it makes the biggest difference.
Yeah, I think advertising, and also I usually come out with the audiobook a few months after the launch as a way to sort of keep that momentum going. I also look for Chirp deals, which is BookBub's audio arm. That's really good too. It's similar to getting a BookBub deal. It's generating a lot of readers, a lot of response. And I think all of I think that's underrated, but I think that all of the reader Facebook groups out there are really huge and really important. And I have found a lot of success with those because a lot of them do like, an annual, author event. And I think it's a way to get exposed to a lot of new readers, especially if you do, some giveaways. So I really think that that's effective too. But, it's kind of like Alison is saying, it's like at some point you kind of have to move on to the next book coming out. And hopefully that new book, sells the backlist, which I do think is an advantage of indie publishing, is that you are always selling your backlist.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, one of the post-launch strategies is like I try to hold my prices and not discount so at some period after launch, I will probably do some kind of price promotion. So I will drop the price. I will run a bunch of I'll do a newsletter stack, which is when you run, multiple different newsletters, Book Booksy, Bargain Booksy, Robin Reads, or whatever. Like you do all the different ones, and you run them within a few days of each other. So hopefully you get some algorithmic lift on the retailers, and then they will also like push your books. And I think so that can be helpful. Having just been in KU, there's some different opportunities there to like, go into prime reading and other things. And then you can potentially do promotions around that on Facebook or on BookBub or other places when you kind of hit on one of those. If you're in, KDP Select, or if you're wide, there's, other things that you can do at different times. Alison, you want to jump in on something?
Yeah. So I remember looking for myself for these different newsletters, and a lot of those people that read the newsletters are looking for deals. And so those are most successful when you have a deal. You're not a surprise when you're traditionally published, you don't have control of the price. And so it's not worth the price of getting into a newsletter unless you have a deal, because if there's all these 99-cent $1.99 and yours is $12.99, it doesn't have the same effect. And the other thing that's interesting for traditional publishing, a lot of times you don't find out when your book is going to be on sale. So I've had people say like, oh, your book is $1.99 or it's on Chirp or something like that. And it's like, oh, shoot. Then you have to really quickly put together a graphic and try to promote it. So you don't always have the lead time. So those newsletters, unless you know that you have a sale coming up, it's not the best, purpose of your use of your money if you're traditional published.
It's a great example of something that's like a well-known best practice in the indie world and makes no sense in the traditional world, right? Like, go put your book in a bunch of newsletters at full price. Don't do it. Don't do it. It's a total waste of time and money. Yeah, total waste of time and money. So I think we're ready, unless Paulette, you had anything else you wanted to say on this topic? Okay, I think we're ready to go to our last two questions here. And I'm actually most excited about the very last one. But first, I wanted to ask each of you, is there anything you wish you knew back when, or any advice you would give to your past self based on all of what you've learned here over the last years? And let me pass this one off to Michelle first.
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess I wish at the beginning I would have not stayed with She Writes Press for so long. Nothing against them, but I just think it was my comfort zone, and I was too afraid to get out of that until push really, came to shove. But I wish I had done that earlier, but I didn't. And I guess advice that I would give to a new writer or a younger me would be to kind of try to figure out what your goal in writing is. So is it to just, do a bucket list book, and a memoir or something, you've only got one book in you and that's it? Or if you're trying to do this, just as a hobby and it's a passion project, or if you're actually trying to make a career out of it and make money, those three paths are very, very different. And if you can identify that early on, you will save yourself a lot of time and money and heartache. So that would be my advice if you can do that.
I love that. Alison.
So I started laughing when he asked that question because, like, my joking but half honest answer is I don't know if I would have done it. No,
I know,
because
right? That's what I want to say.
there are so many hardships, and it's so hard to not have control. But it's also the most incredible, wonderful thing in the world to have people reading your words and thinking about your characters as if they're as real as they are to you. So it's like incredible, but it's hard. And I wish I really understood that every level is hard. You know, you think like if you're going the traditional path, you're like, oh, I got an agent, I'm set now. No, you're not. Oh, I sold my book, I'm set now. No, you're not. Like that, like it's always keeping you on your toes, and there's a new challenge at every level. But that's why the community and the writer friends that you build are so priceless, because you're not alone in it. And I think that publishing is very isolating with the amount of information they give you and what you're supposed to talk about or not talk about. And so as a writer, you have very little control, and that can be hard. And as far as advice, you know, I think maybe that would have been my advice, but I 100% agree with Michelle. And Lainey, you and I had this conversation when you were trying to figure out what to do. It's like you have to figure out your goals, because there's no wrong way. And every book, every author, you know, not just every author's book is different with what's the best thing for it and what you want. If you want to be in the airport bookstores like I did, then you really traditional is your only way. If you just want to get your book out and get it to the most readers as soon as you can, that is not traditional, because it takes a really, really long time. So there's not a right or a wrong way. There's maybe a right thing for you at that moment for that book.
That's awesome. And, you know,
I love that. I love that book specificity, because it can vary from project to project, and you shouldn't feel right or wrong if you want to pivot, like, you know, Michelle did, or if you know, whatever path we're on. It's always, you know, you're going from writing alone to writing with someone else. I mean, it's all part of the journey, and pivoting is totally good. I'm sorry, Lainey, go ahead.
No, you answer. What's your answer to this question? What would you tell?
What's my answer? Okay. I would say you don't have to do all the things, because when you start indie publishing, it is like a fire hose is coming at you. You're in every chat room, you're in every newsletter, you're in all these classes, you're listening to all these podcasts, you're reading articles, and you're getting this mass amount of information, and you just feel like a big fat failure because you don't know. Like, you don't know what to do. You don't know what you don't know, and you make mistakes, and then you feel like you're like some kind of way because you made mistakes. So I just would feel like just breathe, do what you can, and then learn more as you go. Like, start small and grow, I guess, in other words, and give yourself grace if you make mistakes. And it isn't if you make mistakes, it's when you make mistakes. You will make mistakes. So just kind of breathe, and it'll be okay.
I love that.
Lainey, how about you?
Michelle, did you have something to add there first?
Yeah, I did. Paulette, I did the same thing. And at the beginning, I just did anything that came my way. Anything I would say yes to. Even like a local bookstore called me up. It's in like this fancy suburb. And they're like, oh, we want you to be a part of our Indie Author Day. And I'm like, oh, really? Okay. How exciting. And so I got there and they're like, yeah, we want you to hold the door. Like, what? They're like, yeah, you can talk about your book as people come in. And I'm like, okay, I can do it. And, you know, it's just so ridiculous what you're willing to put up with at the beginning. And there's nothing wrong with it, but you know, you figure out over time what works, what doesn't, and you just have only so much time. Go ahead.
There is something wrong. There is something very wrong with what happened to you. Oh my Lord. People, if you're listening to the audio podcast, maybe pop onto YouTube once in a while, because you get like facial expressions, because like, yeah.
All
I'm going to go on mute right now because I can't even like that.
This is Lainey. I can't even add to this. So I was going to say, like, if I was giving advice to my past self, I kind of beat that. But like, I was going to say, there's a reason they call it an author career. And I think, like, in general, across all publishing models, we get a bit too focused on thinking the first book is like the thing. And like, if I were to go back and talk to past me, and Alison helped me so much, like she said, because she said, you know, what's your goal? And I said, my goal is I want to start building credibility and building my life as an author and getting my book to readers. And you know what? That didn't require me to be with a big publisher to do that. So why would I wait for some big publisher opportunity? But I also think that I still put so much pressure on myself that like this first book is it. And it you know, everything teased from the first book and it all builds from there. And I think, you know, we call it an author career. And if you think about your other career, right, before or other than being a writer, you didn't take your first job out of college and say like, oh, my entire career is all dependent on this one job out of college. It felt that way, right? When we started out, right? When we walked in that door of the first job out of college, it felt like our entire future was based on that one moment in time that day. But in retrospect, looking back, was it? No, hell no. Like things go up, they go down, things change, your priorities change. And I think like just that pressure on the first book, thinking that it's all about that first book and everything. It's almost like we treat it like a step. And then we think it's going to be like this regimen and set of steps above it, right? Step 1 is book 1 and step 2 and step 3 and step 4, but it doesn't actually work that way. And I think if we take that pressure off ourselves and stop thinking about like the future of everything is dependent on the first book, it just makes it a bit more fun as well. Like it's not, we can breathe, to Paulette's point, we can breathe a little bit more, that it's just the first step and it's not, it goes, it doesn't go. So anyway, most important question I want to hear from Alison and Michelle. You both either have a book about to come out or a book that just came out. I want to hear a little bit more about them. So Alison, let's lead off with you. You just had one come out and you got another one coming next year. Tell us more about it.
Yeah. So until next summer, if you're just looking on video, I'm holding up the book cover. It is an Ali Brady book, so co-written with Bradeigh Godfrey, one of my besties. And it is we're gearing a little bit more toward romance. Our next book is full romance, but it takes place at an adult summer camp with 2 former best friends who come together for one last summer at the camp that they both loved. They repair their friendship and both find love. So it's been really fun to have that come out, and it did hit the USA Today bestseller list, which is the first book for either of us that's ever done that. So that was really exciting. And then one other thing I'm excited that we just launched or just announced last week, I have an essay coming out in a book that Zibby Owens is publishing called On Being Jewish Now. That comes out, the ebook comes out October 1st and the print comes out November 1st. So that has been just a beautiful thing to be a part of. So that is that's the thing coming up next.
That's great.
And Michelle, what about for you?
I just had a book, my first indie book come out in March, and that was The Fallen Woman's Daughter. So that was based on a real story that I heard in a nursing home. So it's doing really well. It's a little bit of a different tone than my Henrietta and Inspector Howard series, but it's a book, I think, because it was my first indie, it's really dear to my heart. And then in September 5th, which is like in a few weeks, I have a new book coming out called Matched in Merriweather. And that is book 1 of the Merriweather novels. So it stars Melody Merriweather, and she is a character in the original series. So it's a spinoff series. She's getting her own series, and this is going to be a 5-book series, and they are all Jane Austen retellings. So book 1 is obviously a retelling of Emma. So very exciting.
Cool. Well, we are at our time here. Paulette, any last comments before we wrap up here?
No, I just want to thank both Michelle and Alison for joining us. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having us. This is fun.
Thank you. It's been really fun and hopefully helpful.
Yeah,
I hope so. And just a reminder that you can add comments on the YouTube or on Facebook. We will do our best to make sure we respond if you were watching the live or if you're watching it after the fact. And also, I want to point out that all of the links to all of the books that we talked about are on the episode page on our website at bestofbookmarketing.com, including I will add the one for Alison's new anthology, or your role in the new anthology there that you just referenced, to make sure people can easily find it. So check out the website. We have tons of resources. We also have the link to the book from our sponsor that we were talking about earlier, which will help you with doing your own PR, from Lillian Sue, The Powerful Publicity Prescription. And I want to say thank you. That's our first sponsor. And I love that Lillian had confidence in actually kind of putting her trust in us to be our first sponsor. So thank you for that. And with that, we will wrap up. Thanks.
Bye.